created, well, first of all, you haven't created anything. Government does not create jobs. Government perpetuates a meaningless job number and creates positions within the government where people sit and collect a paycheck, some of whom may provide value, many of whom don't, but they provide no productive measure in relation to the actual economy. When you're growing government jobs faster than you're growing private sector jobs, the taxes from which pay for those government jobs, you don't understand how the economy works. So I'm just at that point tonight, and we're kicking off this way. I hope that you'll bear with me in that, well...
Look, you can't be serious, man. You cannot be serious!
Stick with us. We'll be right back here on the Palmetto Conservative Show. I'm going to go see if I can take a chill pill and settle in for segment 2. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
This is not a message of happiness or reassurance. It is a crisis of confidence. The productivity of American workers is naturally dropping.
We aren't out there hungry, selling America. We've been a little bit lazy, I think, over the last couple of decades.
The symptoms of this crisis and the American spirit are all around us.
We've lost our ambition, our imagination.
Owning things and consuming things.
You go to a bank and you use an ATM. You don't go to a bank teller.
All the legislation in the world can't fix what's wrong with America.
The country that had gotten a little soft.
These changes did not happen overnight.
Change cannot happen overnight. What can we do? We've been a little bit lazy.
I was in chronic pain, and my family struggling to make ends meet, food and gas prices going up, even keeping my job was iffy. Then I learned about a new miracle drug made in Washington, D.C. Spenditol. Spenditol is Washington's answer to all the painful problems Americans face. How to borrow $800 billion for a stimulus that didn't create jobs or fix the economy? Spenditol.
Spenditol is not for everyone. Side effects may include a mountain of government debt piled on our kids, a sudden loss of freedoms, higher prices for everything, leaving our kids a lesser America than we had. Ask your doctor or congressman if your conscience is strong enough for Spenditol.
And it's so popular in Washington, we have to import trillions more of it from China. Spenditol makes you feel better now and pushes off the really bad stuff till later, for them to deal with.
Call the White House and Congress. Tell them, stop spending it all.
Yeah, I don't make up the ads, but I got to tell you, I love them. Thanks to the production staff here at the Conservative Broadcast Media Network for providing those. As the network grows and the advertisers join us, expect to add some more stuff like that to the mix. You're listening to the Palmetto Conservative Show here on the Conservative Broadcast Media Network, here on a Wednesday, October 24th. We are now under 2 weeks until what ostensibly is the most significant election in our lifetimes. The first president for which I had the ability to vote was Ronald Reagan. 1980 was my first presidential election. And I will never forget those circumstances that surrounded the election and the malaise that was the country at that time. And there was just something about the personality, the way he communicated, the character that Ronald Reagan brought to the to the campaign that motivated me to cast my first presidential ballot for Ronald Reagan over Jimmy Carter. And what we saw afterwards was a direct reflection of what the world saw in American leadership. Well, what do we see in American leadership right now? We certainly don't have a situation, with all due respect to the President of the United States. I think that his claims that that America is held in higher regard now than it was 4 years ago is pure pablum and just bovine fecal matter. Because, quite frankly, the rest of the world looks at us and laughs. The rest of the world realizes that economically, America, a weak America, economically, is bad for the world. A weakened military of America is bad for the world. Because most of the world that knows of American exceptionalism, most of the world that looks to America with some degree of respect and envy of our success, in their heart longs for those same sorts of things. Those around the world that loathe us, well, there's nothing we can do for them. America has never been involved in colonialism, except those 13 colonies here that threw off colonialism to become these great United States. So with that as a backdrop, before I go off on an irretrievable rabbit hole, back to our debate coverage and thoughts about the debate. And
Look, you can't be serious, man. You cannot be serious!
John snuck back in there for a minute and just reminded me of this exchange that took place in the last debate. This was President Obama's retort to Mitt Romney talking about how he felt that a strong military was important, and the president's strategy and the effects of sequestration were a bad thing. And here was the president's response.
I think Governor Romney maybe hasn't spent enough time looking at how our military works. You mentioned the Navy, for example, and that we have fewer ships than we did in 1916. Well, Governor, we also have fewer horses and bayonets because the nature of our military has changed. We have these things called aircraft carriers where planes land on them. We have these ships that go underwater, nuclear submarines. And so the question is not a game of battleship where we're counting ships. It's what are our capabilities? And so when I sit down with the Secretary of the Navy and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, we determine how are we going to be best able to meet all of our defense needs in a way that also keeps faith with our troops, that also makes sure that our veterans have the kind of support that they need when they come home. And that is not reflected in the kind of budget that you're putting forward because it just doesn't work.
All right.
And we visited the website quite a bit, and it still doesn't work.
I often ask myself when I hear the president speaking, whether it's off teleprompter or off ad lib, your definition of what works is what scares me, because you think that what you're doing is working. And I would argue that $16 trillion in debt, year upon year, multi-trillion-dollar deficits, and chronically high unemployment, and increasingly fewer people in the workforce. If that's your definition of working, I'm very concerned. The sequester that the president so glibly and condescendingly mentioned and lied about was in fact signed by President Obama. It wasn't a surprise. It didn't get dropped into his lap. It didn't show up in his inbox with no involvement on his part. The reason we ended up with the sequester is because he, as a failed leader, did nothing to try and advance the bipartisan recommendations of Simpson-Bowles. Whether you agree with them or not, at least they were a plan, they were something. Playing the political games that you did and being clueless as to what the impact of those things were, in my view. Your strategy of maintaining atrophy of our military is not a strategy. And your glib ignorance and remarks may play well to the base on your base on the left, but we still need to have a strategy. In Governor Romney's remarks prior to President Obama's response, he made mention of the fact that with our military, we used to have the ability to simultaneously fight two regional wars and be prepared to protect the homeland. Now, with the size of the military and our capabilities being cut back to where they are, we are only going to be able to fight one regional conflict. Now, what this points out is that, President Obama talks about the capabilities we have, and I would also question the veracity of his statements that he consults with true military leaders. He may have a couple of generals and admirals who are in his back pocket politically because they have no longer the courage to actually do their job, and that's been a problem within our military for years, the politicization of our generals who really have given up the profession of arms for the profession of politics. But he talks about our capabilities, which fundamentally misses the point. Our capabilities are what we should have in order to execute, to meet our needs and to execute our defense strategy formulated in response to those needs. Now, if it is no longer the need of this country to be able to simultaneously fight two regional conflicts and protect the homeland, then our strategy need not be wrapped around that. But as so often the case, this president picks an answer and forgets any of the upstream questions that need to be answered and inputs that need to be gained. Once we've defined what our needs are, and once we have designed a strategy to meet those needs, then we define what our capability requirements are. And our Navy is telling us that the direction we're going is to a point where we have not too many ships, not too many boats that are able to go underwater. If you Mr. Commander-in-Chief, had any clue about what you were talking about, you would know that the Navy doesn't call submarines ships, they call them boats. You'd also know that they call them corpsmen, not corpsmen. I cringe when I think what he must talk about when he talks about my beloved Air Force. And knowing that he has little, if any, real understanding of the profession of arms, military intelligence, and any of those skills that we as a nation have allowed to atrophy over the last decade and a half or longer. I would rant frequently when I was an active member of the military, an active reservist, about the operations tempo and the rate at which we were using our reserve forces in a day-to-day operational role. And at the end of the day, if you're using your reserves to fulfill your day-to-day operational missions, what happens when you have to surge or deal with a crisis? and you want to call on the reserves.